Back when I was 12 years old and in 7th grade, I was getting ready to go to my county's autumn festival with my friend, we'll call him Ethan, and his brother, who was a couple of years younger than us. Let's call him Danny. We were allowed to go by ourselves, so as long as we promised to return Ethan and Danny's house by 9 p.m. This was a pretty big deal, as their parents were considerably strict, to the point where they weren't even allowed to sleep with their friends when they spent the night, and their friends weren't allowed to sleep over on Saturday nights, unless they brought nice attire to wear to church the following morning. Since it was a Friday night, our plan was to hang out at the carnival and then have a sleepover at their house. It would be the first time our county would be hosting such a large-scale event. Well, large scale for where we lived, anyway. And practically everybody from school would be there. We were pretty excited and did not want to miss out. We were practically on our bikes as soon as school got out, grabbing things like snacks and money beforehand we went out. It took us about 40 minutes to get there, and by the time we arrived, the place was already considerably crowded. Even though the festival itself wasn't particularly special, I vividly remember everything I did there, and honestly, it's probably because my memory from that day was sharpened, as whole due to the experience later on in the night. Anyway, given the crowd, activities to do, and the rides to go on, it wasn't surprising that we eventually lost track of the time. We chained up our bikes and made our way into the festival. We had bought our tickets and decided to go on the rides first, as to not lose track of any candy or prizes we might have won. Danny had a fear of heights, so while I do feel bad for forcing him onto those rides in retrospect, it was funny at the time just to see his reactions to things such as Ferris wheels or the drop tower. He was a champ though, and kept up with us all through the night. We played typical carnival games like balloon pops, ring toss, hoops, and so forth. We won a lot of stuff that was basically just cheap, and eventually stopped to get something to eat. We found a hot dog stand and grabbed some popcorn while we were at it. We played some more games and explored a bit more before Ethan decided to check his phone and realized it was nearly 20 minutes until 9. We went back and forth in debating whether or not to call his parents and let them know we'd be late. But both he and Danny were scared that their parents would be mad if they found out that we hadn't been keeping track of time. We knew there was no way we could make it back in time if we went back the way we came. So, we ended up agreeing to take the shortcut through the bike path in the woods. We'd avoided going that way in the first place out of our own superstition. Like with any small town, myths of things like murderers and monsters came about from school kids, and most common and believed one being that of a crazy old man who lived in a small cabin, kidnapped people, especially children. Once he captured them, he'd scalp them alive and make curtains out of their hair. Everybody liked to act like they didn't believe in it, but it was enough to deter us from the forest under regular circumstances. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was made up by somebody's parents or sibling, so they wouldn't have to worry about the children responsible for sneaking off into the forest. Regardless, Danny and Ethan were certain they had a 100% chance of being murdered by their parents, rather than a hypothetical lunatic in the woods. So, it was a pretty easy decision. We only had the light of the night sky and Ethan's flip phone to guide us. We were supposed to bring flashlights, but it was only then that we'd realized that we had simply forgotten them on the kitchen table. As quietly as we could, we made our way into the woods, and I was even yelled at for having a bit of a squeaky bike, as if it was something I could just fix right then and there. After a couple of minutes of going down the path and nothing happening though, we eventually started easing up a bit, even going as far as to tease each other and laugh about the alleged psychopath murderer that dwelled on the grounds. It stopped being funny as soon as we heard the cracking of sticks lightly echoing in the distance, We stopped in our tracks, breathing heavily, and I urgently whispered to Ethan to put his phone away. He did, and we continued to listen for anything new. Nothing happened, so we slowly continued to make our way through. I couldn't help but wince as my bike squeaked and squealed as it rolled forward. Eventually, Danny pointed the silhouette of something a few yards ahead. I looked towards it and made out the figure of a very large and muscular man with a nearly cartoonish proportions. However, there was something weird about his head. It took me a few moments to figure it out, but I realized it looked to be that of a dog's. Before I could even piece together what things might have been, it turned its head to us, revealing a warm, glowing red eyes. I think we were all too shocked and scared to scream. It continued to look at us, but it didn't move. Ethan started slowly moving closer to this creature, and I urged him to leave it alone. But he was absolutely fascinated. The creature spun around, back into the other direction, and seemed to walk off. Ethan began to speed up after it. Danny and I pleaded for him to stop, but before we knew it, Ethan was merely feet away from the thing. It whipped its body back around, letting out what I can only describe as a lion's roar from hell. He screamed and began to run down the path, and it chased after him full force. I can more easily make it out now. It was completely covered in thick black fur, pitch black fur to be exact, and it had long claws that seemed to be about a foot in length. It almost looked to have bad posture as it moved, as its spine seemed to be at an angle, but it didn't seem to be causing it any trouble while running after Ethan. In an effort to save Ethan, I took one of the prizes I'd won, a small inflated ball with a Spider-Man print, and threw it at this thing, hoping to distract it. It worked, and I didn't even take the time before I started running into the trees, yanking Danny along with me. We hid behind a log, watching as this monster paced up and down the bike path, the sight of its glowing eyes being visible just beyond the tree line. It didn't seem to know where we went, and as soon as it seemed far enough away, quietly as we could, we started moving to go and find Ethan. We eventually found him huddled near some shrubbery, gasping upon the sight of us, then letting out a sigh of relief. We talked as quietly as we could, but still ended up shushing each other. Eventually, we decided to move and slowly walked through the rest of the forest. I remember thinking about how I'd rather have stumbled across the crazy serial murderer instead. We immediately picked up our pace as soon as our neighborhood came into sight, and began to full-on sprint as we made our way past the trees. We urgently knocked on Danny and Ethan's house's door, and their mom opened up, angry as we were 20 minutes past our curfew, and that she'd called Ethan to no avail. We all tried to explain at once what had happened, but their mom was just confused. Eventually, Ethan explained and claimed there was no cell service in the woods, which was why he didn't receive her call. I didn't say it aloud, but I was grateful for that, as I knew the sound of the phone going off would alert of this creature's thing to Ethan's hiding spot, and who knows what could have happened to him if that were the case. Still, their mother didn't take him seriously, or us. She grumbled about she had too long of work today, and that she was too tired, and went to bed. Once Danny and Ethan's dad came home, they told him about what had happened, figuring there was something he could do, and that since he was a cop. Not unlike their mother, he didn't seem to believe us, but he'd said he'd check it out in the morning, and joined his wife in bed. We just decided to try and forget about it, and watched a movie instead. Since his parents were so strict, we couldn't even view anything PG-13, as Ethan and I were still only 12. I found it almost morbidly funny, because I knew what we had experienced was far, far scarier than any R-rated horror movie. I was picked up early the following morning, But what I heard from Ethan in school on Monday was that when he and his dad visited the woods, they found all of our bikes absolutely destroyed and mangled, along with all the prizes from the carnival that we dropped while running away. His dad reported it to the other officers at the station, but our story was just treated as another tale to keep kids out of the woods. A lot of my classmates asked me about it, but instead of enjoying retelling it over and over again, I found that I didn't really want to talk about it. It stuck around though, and I was asked about it all the way up until I moved in my sophomore year of high school. By that point, I said the story was a joke or a prank to scare people, just like the psycho murderer tale. It did hurt my reputation, but I knew I was going to be leaving soon by then, so there wasn't much to lose. On top of that, it helped me get a sort of revenge on Ethan. During our freshman year, we had a falling out when he knowingly asked out the girl I liked. They ended up dating after that, and from then on, I used practically any opportunity I could just to smear his image, even if it meant taking myself down along with him. Of course, I think it's stupid now, and that I was far too dramatic and sensitive over the whole ordeal. The only reason I added this information is because Ethan recently popped up on my People You May Know while I was on Facebook. There's a theory that the algorithm makes it so that those who are consistently looking up at your profile pop up. So if that's the case, I'm curious about what made him want to do that after a full decade of us not speaking. He still seems to live in my hometown, and his profile is full of posts warning about demons and Judgment Day coming. I can't help but wonder if he saw the thing again. I guess I'll never know.